Hi everyone, I hope you're all having a great week. This week I'm going to be working on a textured watercolor abstract, and I'm going to be using a few different elements that I haven't used before. The first here is this tape that I bought a while ago that I hadn't really used because it was very thin and not very narrow, and I didn't really know that I had a good use for it, and I found the use for it. And then I'm also going to be using some of this drywall tape. I just thought, hey, why not give it a try? I wasn't sure if it would adhere to the paper too much and make it hard to remove it without tearing the paper, but it turns out that it sticks just the right amount, and it's going to help me to create some really interesting textures in my painting. Working with watercolor ground, I'm kind of always doing something a little bit different than I normally would do with my watercolors, because I'm finding myself creating a bit of a sculpture, if you will, on my paper before I even start the painting process. And normally I would start adding color and then just build from there. But what I do here is sort of similar to what I'm doing with paint, except I'm doing it with tape and other supplies. I'm trying to build the concept for a painting. I don't really have anything really specific in mind. I'm just kind of adding tape in different locations, and then I know I'm gonna put in some watercolor ground to cover the areas that are not covered with the tape, and that's gonna leave some kind of a design in my background. And then I'll start adding my paints and I'll create my painting. One of the best ways I can start most every one of my painting processes is by just starting with a very light wash of color. I often am not 100% sure exactly what direction to start off in when I'm painting any any painting. And so if I can just at least get some color on the paper, it helps me get the process rolling. Now, in this instance, I am adding some colors that are also going to help bring out some of the textures that are on the paper. As you noticed, I'm sure, before I added any color to the paper, it was very hard to see the textures that were there. So by the simple fact of adding a little tiny bit of color, even if it's just a light wash, I'm bringing out those textures even more, and that will help me make some more decisions as I move forward. I'm ready to start adding some more color, but I'm not feeling overly committal at this point. So I'm going to start by using a color in a very light wash, raw sienna, in fact, a color that I really don't work with very often, but it looks like a very light shade of some other colors that I actually love quite a bit. So I'm going to start by adding it and then let my intuition guide me as the process keeps going along. When it comes to picking a color palette for a painting, I think that it's always best to just go with what really speaks to you. For me, it tends to be colors that I either see in nature or maybe some color palettes that I've noticed in another painting by someone else that I thought was really pretty, or maybe it's something that I saw in home design. I mean, the sky's the limit. There's really so much that can influence and inspire our color choices. And so I look for what appeals to me from my environment. Whatever I come across that I find pretty is usually what helps to guide me in this area. And sometimes it can be as simple as just looking at my own watercolor palette and going from there, looking at the colors that are in my palette that are painted onto my little guide for my colors in my palette, and seeing which colors I feel go well together, or colors that sort of help each other really stand out. So there's no, maybe there is a science to it. What I'm trying to say is that I don't know what that science is. Personally, I just go with whatever it is that speaks to me. And I think that's always a good place to start. And of course, as I go along building up my layers of color, I also love to increase the effects in my paint and the marks that are left in the paint by using some salt. And there's a lot already on my background because I did add some watercolor ground in the initial part of my process, but I want to create some additional effects, and the salt is usually a really easy, inexpensive way to get this done. It's usually a pretty rare thing for me to show the part of my process where I remove the salt from my paper after the paint and paper are dry, but it's something I always do before moving on to adding more color. And you can do this in a number of ways. You can use a clean paper towel, or you can use your hand if you are wearing some light gloves. But it's, I think, a good idea to remove the salt before adding paint to your paper. For one, the rough texture of the salt might wreak some havoc on your brushes. Not probably something you want to do. If you're like me, you value your art supplies and you know that they can be a bit on the expensive side, so it's good to do whatever we can to keep them in good working order. And it may have some effects on your paint process. Now, I have said before, if you wanted to try it, I don't see why it wouldn't be a good idea to try it, because you never know, you might make some really cool discovery along the way. I have sort of told myself that at some point I will do that, but I haven't gotten to that point yet. I really do kind of like, I kind of get in the mindset when I'm painting of I don't know, just going with the flow, and when things start to flow and they're flowing really well, I don't want to be interrupted, not all the time anyway, by an experiment. So I'm really liking what I've created on this painting so far in terms of textures with the watercolor ground, and I like the light textures that the salt left in the background. But I'm not really feeling overly keen on experimenting with painting over granules of salt. So I removed them before I started painting again. And there's a good chance that as I'm going along, I will probably add some more salt to different layers of color, because the more I do this, the more texture it creates, the more interesting little marks it makes in the painting. And for me, all of these little things, even though they're not necessarily going to show up at the very end exactly as they're showing up at that specific point in the painting process, they contribute something to the painting process. No matter how big or how small they actually show up in the final image, I do feel like every little detail matters. And so I like to create textures, and then I like to put paint over them, and all of that sort of adds up to creating my final concept. For me, quinacridone deep gold paired with just about any blue, almost any blue, I really always feels like it's a good thing. It's those two colors together really speak to me, and so you'll often find them in my paintings. And I guess I don't know that I can call it a signature of mine. I don't know that colors can be a signature, but they definitely find their way into my paintings a lot of the time, because they're a color combination that I really, really enjoy. And I do find, I mean, just look at it. It kind of speaks for itself, that quinacridone deep gold against the blue, they both really make each other shine. At least I think so. And so I work with colors that I really love, and sometimes I challenge myself to work with colors that are more challenging for me. But if I'm in the process of creating a painting that I'm really excited about, like in this case, I'm really feeling pretty excited about the textures and the patterns that I created in the background with the watercolor ground. And so in this case, I have maybe a bit of a tendency to want to play a little safe by choosing colors that really speak to me, that I know play well together. rightfully or wrongly, I mean, I'm a human being. I have my quirks, I have my preferences, and I love to challenge myself, but sometimes I just want to paint for the pure pleasure of painting and watching the colors mix together and blend in ways that speaks to my soul. Hey, it's a good thing. I definitely love it. So that's kind of why I went with these colors. I really love them together, and I'm gonna make sure that they still show in the final painting, but there will be other colors added to this as I go along because I want this to stand out more. The textures are interesting, the colors are beautiful together, but right now they don't stand up very much because it's all a very similar, uniform blend of color values. There's very little contrast at this point. And so in order for those colors to really start to stand out more, they need more contrast. Probably one of my all-time favorite blues is phthalo turquoise. It's kind of a greenish blue, and I love it. It's maybe it reminds me of the sea. I guess it does remind me of the sea, especially when you travel and go to places like the Caribbean, and the color of the water is just, oh, I don't know, it's just so gorgeous. And so I bring the things that I love into my paintings, and this color is a color that is very reminiscent of colors that I see in nature that I really, really, really love. And so why wouldn't I use them in my paintings? Because they really speak to me. It just seems to make sense that we use colors that speak to our souls. And so for you, you might be you might be watching this process, and some of you may really love these colors in the same way that I love them, and some of you may not, and that is completely okay. It's completely okay because as you're watching this, maybe these colors aren't speaking to you, but hopefully you can imagine the colors that you do love and the colors that do speak to you more, and you can imagine yourself creating a painting with those colors. Even though I really love that phthalo turquoise, it's important for me to keep the painting interesting by varying the shades of colors that you see in the painting. I am doing so in a way where the turquoise blends with the other colors that I'm adding to it. And in this instance, I'm adding a bit of a color called intense blue, and it's another beautiful blue that I really, really love. And it blends really well with the phthalo turquoise. And so why not use it? Because I don't want my whole entire painting to just be one flat shade of color. I want it to be a blend of different colors because I think that'll make it more interesting and more visually appealing. And so it's fun to create glazes of color over colors that are already existent and not blending them because you want to sort of preserve their integrity. But it's also really fun to blend colors together and to see what you can actually accomplish by blending the colors. It really does add something to the painting process. When I'm working with texture in a painting, I also really like to remind myself that value contrast not only adds interest to the painting itself, but it also helps to make my textures stand out more. If I only used the same color over a textured surface, you wouldn't see the texture in the surface nearly as much as when you put something else near the texture to help make it stand out more. I hope that makes sense. But yeah, even just looking at this little sort of half sun, if you will, it's like a really abstract sun, but if you look at this and you see how that blue that I'm adding to it, even though I'm not adding a ton of it to it, it is making that shape stand out more, because when the texture of that shape was only colored in that quinacridone deep gold, it didn't stand out enough. It wasn't really as noticeable. But as soon as you add a little bit of that blue to contrast with the quinacridone deep gold in the little nooks and crannies of that textured piece in the painting, it really helps to bring it out. When I'm not painting, and sometimes even when I am painting, I spend a lot of time contemplating life. I love to read, I love to learn languages, I love to just learn about people and how we are and what makes us who we are. And I just love to learn more about the world around me. And I came across this concept from Africa called Ubuntu. I'm not really sure I'm even pronouncing it correctly. The first time I actually came across it was probably on a post I saw on either Instagram or maybe even on Pinterest. But it was something that really spoke to me, and I felt compelled to bring it up today because last week during my video I was talking about some of the struggles I was feeling with recent events that had taken place in our state. And I, of course, that's given me much pause for thought, and I'm always trying to figure out, how we can do things better, how we can do things differently. And there are people in the world who seem to have ways of living together in community that seem to work really, really well for them. And so this concept of Ubuntu is one where I first read that in certain regions of South Africa, when someone does something that's considered wrong, they're taken to the center of the village and they're surrounded by their tribe for 2 days while they speak of all the good that the person has done. They sincerely believe that each person is good, and yet sometimes we make mistakes, and I think this is true. We all make mistakes, but that does not take away from the fact that we can, at our core, be good people. And that, so they say, well, each person is good, and sometimes we make mistakes, and those mistakes are really just a cry for help. So they all unite in this tribe in a ritual to encourage the person to reconnect with their true nature. And the belief is that unity and affirmation have more power to change behavior than shame and punishment. And I really feel strongly about that too. I feel that in our society we're often very quick to shame other people or to shame ourselves or to bring shame to others when something happens that's not right. We'll either point the finger at the person and blame them for whatever, or point the finger at their parents and blame them for not having done a good enough job raising their child, and so on. But shame, and I mean, some of you may know by now that I'm a big fan of Brene Brown. Shame is definitely not a very helpful thing to bring to a conflict or to a situation. It has the opposite effect, I guess is what I should say. It has the opposite effect of what we'd like to accomplish. I think sometimes we think when we bring shame to a situation that, we're somehow gonna shake a person to the core and make them realize that what they did was wrong and that, they need to smarten up. In reality, they made a mistake, and shaming them for the mistake might make it harder for them to actually overcome and do differently next time. So the concept of Ubuntu is really about expressing and showing an appreciation for the humanity we all have and for the humanity of others. It's recognizing that we're all capable of making mistakes and that sometimes we just need a little bit more love and a little bit more understanding in order to help overcome those mistakes and the things we do in this life that we're not really proud of doing. And I'm sure we've all had those moments. The concept of Ubuntu is one I also appreciate because it seems to be one that looks to bring people from a community together to really love and take care of each other. As I've been trying to learn a little bit more about this concept of Ubuntu, I have been looking at all the places online where I could possibly find information on the topic, and I am a self-professed collector of quotes, and I came across this little story that I really loved, and I saved it in my quotes, and I want to share it with you because I think it's a really beautiful story that really illustrates well the concept of Ubuntu. So the story goes like this. An anthropologist proposed a game to the kids in an African tribe. He put a basket of fruit near a tree and told the kids that whoever got there first won the sweet fruits. When he told them to run, they all took each other's hands and ran together. Then they sat together, enjoying their treats. When he asked them why they had run like that as one could have had all the fruit for himself, they said, Ubuntu. How can one of us be happy if all of the other ones are sad? Ubuntu in the Xhosa culture means I am because we are. I am because we are. What a powerful and beautiful saying. Why would I feel the need to bring this up during a painting process? I guess probably because last week I expressed some sadness and frustration, and I was really struggling with what was going on, and I've been struggling, I guess, with how things are sometimes handled in our world. And I feel like at its core, if we just simply took care of each other, all of each other, not just the ones that are easier for us to love, but if we came together as a community and we really offered each other love and support, I feel like somehow that would make a huge difference, and yet we find it so difficult. But these children in Africa remind us that it doesn't have to be complicated. It just has to be about understanding that none of us can really win if we don't all win. Now back to my painting process. So you've surely noticed by now that I've been not only working on building up my colors in this painting, but I'm also working on building up my values, and more specifically, value contrast in the painting. As I've mentioned before, this is not only going to help me make my textures stand out, it's also going to help make the painting more interesting to look at. Here I'm working with a color called Van Dyke Brown, which is a very rich and dark shade of brown that I really like. And I think it goes well with the sort of rustic feel of this painting. And so I'm adding some of it to the area where I feel like I want the texture to be more noticeable. And as I'm doing this, I'm realizing or feeling as though it's good, but that my value contrast could be even a bit darker. And so shortly I'm gonna bring out my brush pen that has black ink in it, and I'm also gonna use it to add a little bit more contrast to this area of the painting. As I'm working here with the black ink from my brush pen, I'm not being careful about using it only on dry paper. In fact, if I were to use it on dry paper or dry paint, it would leave a very harsh line, and that's not really the point of what I'm trying to do here. So I'm going into those areas that are wet and I'm adding some black ink, and because the area is still wet, that ink is going to spread a little bit and it's not going to leave a very stark line. This painting process was actually a lot longer than what you're going to be seeing in this video, and I'm doing so because I really doubt any of you would want to spend hours and hours watching a video, or maybe if you're like me, maybe you would, but I did feel that it was important for me to do some editing. And so when you're seeing me come into an area like this, for instance, where I'm adding what looks like just pure paint, please know that before I came in with the paint, I also went in with some water, and I put water over the area so that when I would come in with the paint, it would spread a little bit rather than leave a harsh line, kind of what I was saying earlier. And so, yeah, just be aware of that. Because if you do come in on dry paper with your paint and it's very pigmented, it's gonna leave a very stark line that you may or may not want. And in my case, I really didn't want that, so I decided that I needed to add some water. After letting the paint and paper dry, I'm now feeling ready to start playing with my ink pens, and I've brought out my fountain pen to start adding a few little details. Not anything that's overly noticeable, but just a little something to draw you in closer. I love what I've been able to create so far, and yet I look at the painting and I still feel like something's missing. And right now, I think it might be that there's not enough of a light value contrast. So I'm working with the idea that that's what's going on, and I've pulled out a bit of white gesso and I'm just adding it here and there in the painting in the hopes that it might be just the thing to sort of wake things up. And it does seem to be helping a little bit, but it's not really feeling quite like enough. So I either need to add a little bit more of it or I need to go in a different direction. But I'm going to keep playing with this idea for now until my intuition asks me to do something else. After adding a little bit more white here and there in the painting, it still feels like it wasn't enough. And when I'm at a loss for what it is I need to do in a painting, I like to use a trick that many artists use, and that's to take a picture of what you've accomplished so far and to edit the picture so that you can look at it in black and white mode. And usually when I'm looking at it in that way, the solution comes to me really quickly. So looking at this painting right now in black and white, there is some dark value, but maybe not enough of it. So I think that's where I need to go, not more light contrast value, but some more dark contrast value. And that's exactly what I'm going to do now. And with just a few short brush strokes, it really feels like this is definitely the right direction for me to go. Already the elements in my painting are popping more by just the simple fact of me adding this neutral tint. Neutral tint is not a color that's nearly as dark as black, but it is a very nice dark color, and I work with it quite a bit. Usually I mix it with other colors, but in this case I'm going straight for the neutral tint in its full undiluted form, or very lightly diluted form. I've added some water, but I'm getting the paint straight from the pan itself, so it's pretty concentrated. Do you see what I mean about adding this dark color and how it really is helping to make all of the other elements in the painting pop more? It really was the thing that was missing, and I'm glad that I made the time to take that black and white picture, or look at that black and white picture, so that I could see what was missing, because it became very evident when I did that. And now that I'm adding this neutral tint, I really feel like it's moving my painting more closely to a point where I'm feeling like it's nearing completion. But there are still a couple little things I want to do before I'm ready to call it done. I think the final touch to this painting has to be 24 karat Merc gold. It's going to help to make that focal point in the upper right hand corner of the painting pop a little bit more, and I'm also going to bring some of that into the area of the painting where I use the drywall tape so that I can actually make that area stand out more as well. I love 24 karat Merc gold. For one, it's not a very expensive paint to buy, and it's very bright and very shimmery. So it seems to always have just the right effect in my paintings. Now, I'm not saying that it would be the perfect color for every painting, but in this painting in particular, it definitely does work, and I'm super happy to be adding it to these different areas that I'm adding it to now. Yeah, that was definitely the way to go. So I'm very happy with the way the painting has progressed, and I'm feeling as though it is finished. Texture, how I love you. It really feels to me anyway, like it takes my watercolor paintings to a whole new level, and I really love all the textures in this painting and how it all came together as one complete piece. I love it. Ah, is it strange that I love to stare at my paintings this way? Oh my goodness. I hope it's not. And in fact, I hope when you finish a painting and you're really happy with it, I hope you stare at it and admire it and adore it for all of the beauty it is, because, it takes commitment, it takes patience, it takes time, it takes trusting oneself to create art. And I think it's good that we can tap ourselves on the back every once in a while. It's been another really fun painting process, and I hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed creating this painting. Thank you again for joining me on my creative journey. I hope you have a wonderful week and happy creating!